Jose Siri has started off camp hot, putting him in the lead to be the Mets starting center fielder on opening day. The question is, how long will he hold on to that position? I'm going to talk about that more on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Now, if you look at hitters in Mets camp so far that have gotten 10 plate appearances or more, Jose Siri is pretty high up on the list when it comes to the guys that are producing at the best clip right now. You got Pete Alonso, who leads all Mets hitters with a 1727 OPS. He's 3 for 6 with 3 doubles and 5 walks. He has yet to strike out. So Pete, so far, having a pretty good camp. You got Juan Soto, who hasn't quite gotten to 10 plate appearances, but he's 3 for 8 with 2 home runs, 1 walk, 1 strikeout, a 1569 OPS. You got Brett Baty, we've talked about him a bunch, hitting 7 for 16 so far. That's a 438 average, 2 home runs and a double, a 1346 OPS. Luis Torrens, 5 for 12, hitting 417 with an 879 OPS. Jesse Winker, 4 for 10, 2 doubles, 2 walks, and an 1100 OPS. But the guy that is leading the team right next to Pete Alonso in OPS is Jose Siri at 1,700. He's 3 for 10. He's got 3 walks to 3 strikeouts, and all 3 of those hits are home runs. He leads the Mets in home runs. He leads the Mets in RBIs. Now, granted, this is only 5 games, but he has homered in 3 of his 5 starts for the New York Mets. And when you talk about where the Mets were coming into camp, this is one of the position battles that we were going to pay attention to. It always seemed like Jose Siri was going to be the favorite to get that starting center fielder job because I think the Mets like Tyrone Taylor's versatility off the bench. They like his ability to not just play a strong center field, but to play a great right field and left field as well. I think they really do value him as a 4th outfielder. And everything they said about Jose Siri is that he's sort of replacing that Harrison Bader role of your primary defensive center fielder. But again, we saw last year that really was a time split between Bader and Taylor. So this was something to watch. Who was going to just go out and maybe win the job? Or is it just going to be a de facto, okay, Jose Siri, it's your job because neither of you hit? Well, Tyrone Taylor's 2 for 9 so far. I mean, it's small sample sizes. We're not going to read into them too much. But a guy hitting 3 home runs and driving in 7 and doing some exciting things, making a diving catch on Sunday. It's worth taking note of that Jose Siri has gotten off to a fast start. And I think that's just going to be that confirmation bias that he needed to guarantee that he's going to be the starting center fielder at the beginning of the season. And then, of course, as the year wears on, Carlos Mendoza will play the hot hand, and you'll see plenty of playing time for both of these guys because I think both of them should be in the outfield to close out games. We're going to see a lot of Juan Soto or Brandon Nimmo maybe coming out for defense if the Mets have a good enough lead where they feel comfortable pulling one of those guys' bats out of the lineup to just get marginally better defensively. You're going to see those guys maybe DH some to get both Siri and Taylor in the outfield at the same time. So it's going to be really interesting to see how much each of those guys plays, but it's going to be a lot. These are guys that are going to have a pretty big role, and it's largely due to the fact that the Mets want to have as good of a defensive outfield as possible, and these are the guys you want running down fly balls in the gap. So I don't think that anything defensively would surprise us, but Jose Siri is the type of offensive player that can wow you in little moments. Like you'll see him, as we've seen so far in spring, hit a towering home run that he pimps, and all of a sudden you look at a guy that's like, man, does Jose Siri have star potential? It'll look like that in stretches. Overall, you talk about what this guy's been throughout his career. He's not an above average hitter. He just hasn't been. But he has been a consistently productive player in the big leagues for the last 3 years. You look at the WAR totals, 2022, 1.8 WAR. 2023, a 2.6 WAR, and this is according to Fangraphs. 2024, a 1.9 WAR. WAR is wins above replacement. If you're about a 2-win player in the big leagues, that's a very solid piece to a big league roster. Again, most of that is defense and speed, but there is power in his bat. The first year that he played some serious time was 2022, and he only hit 7 home runs, drove in 24, stole 14 bases, hit 213, 268 on base, 339 slug. Not great offensive numbers. 2023, the best year of his career so far. He hit 25 homers, drove in 56, stole 12 bags, hit 222, 267 on base, 494 slug, 106 weighted runs created plus. That is a stat that measures hitters on a league average of 100. So he was slightly above league average that year, and that shows you if he can be a league average bat that's leaving the yard 25 times, that's playing elite defense in center field, you're looking at the potential of a 3-win player. If he can uptick the offensive stats a little bit, and maybe he can hit instead of 220, if it's 240, and maybe he can get on base at a 280 clip instead of a 260 clip. I mean, these marginal upgrades when it comes to the offensive production are just going to make that overall WAR total pop, because he just has such a strong baseline when you're talking about a guy that this past year defensively was a top 10 defender in baseball, 16 outs above average in center field, 12 defensive runs saved. He was top 10 in both of those defensive categories. Now, where are the issues with Jose Siri? I mean, you've got a little bit of a snippet of the batting averages. Let's talk about what he did last year. He hit 187. You're 13 points below the Mendoza line. That's not great. 255 on base. That's brutal. 366 slug. He did hit 18 homers, 14 stolen bases, but a 78 WRC plus means he was 22% worse than your league average hitter. It really is feast or famine for Jose Siri. If you look at what the projection models have for him, it's projected to be 15 to 17 homers, 45 to 57 RBIs, a 206 to 215 batting average, on base percentages ranging from 265 to 273, slug ranging from 380 to 403, and then the WAR total being somewhere between 1 and 2 wins. I think he's pretty safely going to get above 1.5 wins and be around 2 wins. And I think there is the potential that he does hit 20 home runs. And if he does that, that's an outstanding outcome, even if the slash line is atrocious. If there's 20 games where he's giving you a home run while playing great defense in center field, he's a big impact player in those 20 games, and he's always going to impact the game defensively. But with all of that said, when we're looking at Jose Siri and a ceiling that might not have been reached yet, as he's still 29 years old, and he could turn in maybe the best year of his career this year, where who knows, maybe he is able to, instead of striking out at the 36% rate throughout his career, maybe he gets the Ks down to 30%. Maybe he gets the walk rate, which for his career is at 6%. Maybe he gets it to 8%. These little marginal things that might make him at least a league average hitter, if not a little bit better, where you can dream a little bit on a WAR total that can get closer to what Harrison Bader did last year, which, depending on where you look, I mean, let me see. Harrison Bader, by Baseball Reference last year, was only a 1-win player. And by Fangraphs, I think Fangraphs liked him a little bit more. Fangraphs, 1.3 win player. I think those numbers took a big hit. I'd have to look. I think in the first half he was trending a lot better than that. But regardless, you're going to get that production from Bader. You're going to get that production from Siri replacing Bader. But I think the hope is, and the reason why the Mets did not reunite with Harrison Bader and decide to make this trade for Jose Siri, is you're getting a guy that you think might have a higher ceiling with that power, with the speed, maybe even being a little bit better defensively in center field because he's younger. And also you got 3 years of team control. And that's what I'm going to talk about next. As you sort of think about where Jose Siri fits into the Mets plans a little bit more long-term than this year, is this a guy that's going to stay in this roster for the next 3 years? Or is he just a stopgap to some other center fielders that are coming up the pipeline? I want to go through that a little bit in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and the game tips off. The NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss the opening tip-off, you can bet on that fourth quarter comeback. You can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for that late game rally or if I'm picking a player to hit that clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app, super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our next goal is to get to 13,000 subscribers by opening day. I appreciate all of you that continue to hit that red button to subscribe. Let's talk about Jose Siri's future with the New York Mets. This year, the role is pretty simple. He's your starting center fielder. Tyrone Taylor will eat into his playing time, and you're just going to see how well he swings it, but he is here to play defense in center field, and that is something that we know he's going to thrive at. When you're talking about the tools for Jose Siri, the funny thing is he's sort of a fringe four-tool player. Which tools does he have? Speed, big check. He flies on the base pass and in center field. Fielding, elite defensive center fielder. Hitting for power, that's there. That's there a little bit. Arm, that's another tool that he's got. Here's the one that he doesn't have. Hitting for average. And when you are so bad hitting for average that you're going to flirt with the Mendoza line and you're not getting on base on top of it because you don't necessarily have a good eye at the plate, you're over anxious, you chase a lot, you whiff a lot, you just don't draw many walks on top of striking out a ton. Well, that's going to mitigate the power tool. So all of a sudden, the three tools that he definitely has, the speed, the defense, the arm, that's going to carry him to being an above average big leaguer. But unless he can figure out that hit tool to at least get somewhere close to average or even just below average, but not atrocious, that power tool is going to be so much better because if he's just getting in better counts, if he's putting together more competent, more patient at bats, he's going to get more pitches to hit. And this is a guy that can find a barrel and hit a ball a long way. So it's going to be really interesting to see if Jose Siri can turn himself into a good offensive piece this year. I don't think he's ever going to be consistent offensively, but if he's part of a really good lineup, I do think that bodes a little bit better. Last year he was with Tampa where, that lineup was just brutal. So you imagine here getting to play with, Juan Soto, might rub off on him a little bit in this lineup in general where, he's going to provide some power from the bottom of the lineup. You might see the best season of Jose Siri's career this year. I'm not expecting him to be a 5-win center fielder, but could he push 3.5 wins if everything breaks right? I think so. And that is unbelievable production to get for a guy that you acquired by trading a minor league reliever in Eric Orsi. Not that Eric Orsi can't be a great reliever for the Rays. And when you go to that team in particular and you have a really good pitch like Orsi does with his changeup, you think that he might end up being a pretty nice addition for them specifically. But Jose Siri can certainly make this trade well worth it for the New York Mets this year. Beyond this year is where it gets interesting to me because he does have 3 years of team control. One of the reasons why the Rays probably were, willing and maybe motivated to trade him is the fact that he's hitting arbitration. He ended up making $2.4 million. It's not a ton, but for the Rays, who I'm sure have another center fielder that they feel good about that's going to make less, it made some sense to move him, especially getting a guy that they probably value. For the Mets, this is a cheap piece to put on your roster, but long term, how much do you want to go with both Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri, who probably should be fourth outfielders? Now, again, center field is a position that the Mets really value the defense at, where they're willing to sacrifice offense for defense. It's clear under David Stearns that's going to be the move moving forward. Otherwise, Brandon Nimmo might still be a center fielder, but he's not. He's in left, and he's going to be in left. They want to keep center field open for, guys that can run down those fly balls that have to help the pitching staff, but also there are some prospects in this system that you hope can develop into being contributors in center field. And that's where I think this conversation is pretty fascinating as one to follow throughout the season, because let's just say you're getting absolutely nothing from Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor offensively, which is a very distinct possibility. At what point can someone push to grab some playing time from them? And I think the earliest candidate to do so would be Luis Angel Acuña, because he's got a shot to make this opening day roster. The other guys that I think we'll talk about, Drew Gilbert, Jett Williams, they're not going to break camp with the team. So Acuña has maybe the first crack at pushing those guys. We still don't know if he will make the big league roster. He did have a scary moment over the weekend where he got hit in the forearm by Shane McClanahan. Luckily, seems like he is okay, so that the Mets dodge a bullet there. He hasn't gotten off to a great start this spring, Acuña. I think his OPS is below 500, small sample size. But Beatty is outplaying him at the moment and might get that bench spot. Acuña then goes down to Syracuse, where I bet you he sees a fair amount of time in center field, at third base, at second base, as well as still getting his reps at shortstop as the Mets continue to improve that versatility, so that if there is an injury in center field or at second or at short or at third, they have Acuña waiting in the wings to come up and play a big league role. And if he can go down to AAA, or if he makes it up, but assuming that he starts the year in AAA getting everyday reps and he's raking, and let's say Jeff McNeil is doing a nice job offensively, and you're looking at third base and Vientos is still holding it down, and maybe even Brett Beatty has gotten off to a strong start during the season. Maybe there's a point in time where the Mets are looking at their center field situation, and maybe there's a little bit of diminishing returns, and who knows? If Starling Marte hits the IL or whatever it is and you have a roster spot available, maybe you then bring up Acuña and you give him some run in center field and see if he can grab that job. And if he does, you might DFA or try to move a Taylor or a Siri at some point midseason. I could see that happening. I really could. Now, if it's not Acuña, the question is, who is it? Can Drew Gilbert enter the fray again? I talked about him in the top 10 that I did over the weekend. I broke down my top 10 list of the best prospects in the Mets farm system. I had Drew Gilbert at 9, but I spoke about how this is a player that is coming off a rough year due to the hamstring injury, who has a lot of people that are sort of selling stock in him that really can burst back onto the scene this year and remind people how good he can be. I don't think he's going to be an elite regular in the big leagues necessarily, but can he be something close to what Jose Siri and Tyrone Taylor have become at the big league level, as far as guys that can go out there and field their position really well in the outfield and do some things well offensively? I think he can do that. I think he can run into 15 to 20 home runs in the big leagues with regular playing time. I really believe that. And that's pretty much what you've gotten, or what you've seen out of Taylor and Siri so far in their careers. Jose Siri, he steals bases, but doesn't swipe 20 bags. Can Drew Gilbert get to that point where he's able to add 15 stolen bases? I think there's a world where he does get there. But I also think that there's a more likely outcome that he's a fourth outfielder than a starting center fielder. Jett Williams, he's a guy that I think you're really hoping can grab that starting center fielder job, because second base is a position the Mets have so much depth at, with Acuña, with Ronnie Mauricio, now Brett Beatty playing second base, with Jeff McNeil still under contract beyond this season, where if you can get a center fielder out of Jett Williams, for one, you're going to have a more valuable player in your hands, but two, you might have a legitimate offensive weapon playing center field for you. So that's a guy to watch this year. How much center field is he playing? Is he hitting when he gets up to AAA? I'm not sure if he's going to start there. I think he might start the year in AA. Does Jett fly through the system? He's a name to watch. Carson Benz just got drafted, but he's a college draft pick. Can he fly through the system? I'm not expecting to see Benz this year, but could you see him midseason 2026 as your center fielder of the future? That's a distinct possibility. Nick Morabito, he was my just missed. I had him at number 11 in the Mets system, right outside my top 10. He's a guy that could absolutely build off of a great season last year where he was the player of the year in the Mets farm system. He's likely gonna get a ton of time in Double-A this year. He finished last year with, was it like 80 games or so on high A? That's off the top of my head. I'm not entirely sure if that's accurate, but he got up to high A very early in the season last year after just flatly dominating in low A. Does he start the year in Double-A, and can he continue to sort of impress and surprise with his ability to hit for a high average? Because if he does continue to hit for a high average as he goes through the system, instead of thinking about a high probability fourth outfielder, which he certainly is, because he's got the ability to play really good defense at all three spots, and he's got elite game-changing speed on the bases. Nick Morabito, if he can continue to run batting averages in the 300s, he might be the center fielder of the future. So there's a lot of guys that are vying for that title of center fielder of the future. Right now, I think Jett Williams has the inside track, but I don't think that Nick Morabito, Drew Gilbert, or even Carson Bench are necessarily guys that are so far on the outside looking in. I think these are all guys that could conceivably have that role in the next 2 to 3 years, depending on the player we're talking about. So it's going to be really interesting to see when you have Jose Siri for 3 seasons, when you have Tyrone Taylor for this one and next one, how long are both of these guys rostered? I think in an ideal situation, by the time you get to the playoffs this year, one of these young guys has grabbed the position where you've picked between Siri or Taylor to be your defensive-minded fourth outfielder, and somehow one of them's off the roster. I really think that's the best outcome of this season for the Mets. But if nothing else, if none of the young players really grab that role, I do think you have 2 guys that can hold it down in 2025. And the question is, are they once again being asked to hold it down in 2026? If they are, I think some things went wrong for the Mets farm system, because you really hope that one of these guys, whether it's Acuña, who I didn't even mention there, Gilbert, Williams, Morabito, Benj, like one of these guys has the level of a breakout where you really have them circled as center fielder of the future come 2026. So we'll see what happens in the farm system when it comes to that. If you're looking for more analysis of the top 10 prospects in the Mets farm system, or the 5 guys that just missed my top 10, you can go back and find some of those episodes where I really went in depth on the prospect side of things. And I want to ask this same question about center field for the New York Mets to Aram Layton, who is an unbelievable prospect analyst for us at Just Baseball, who just did the Mets top 15 prospects for our site. I want to ask him about that too. And I'm going to try to get him on the show either this week or next, depending on his schedule. I know he's going to a lot of backfields, watching a lot of spring training action for primarily some of the top prospects in the game right now. But hopefully I can get him on to talk about this a little bit further, because I think this is one of the more interesting conversations about the Mets when you're talking about the future. Center field is a position that is wide open. So we'll spend some more time on that later this week or next week, but we still got spring training notes. So I want to talk about the latest in camp when it comes to the pitching side of things in particular. I'll go through that in just a minute. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets Insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets signed photo giveaways. And this past week, I actually gave away 3 signed photos. I want to give a quick shout out to Jeffrey and Andy for winning those signed photos. I also need a name on my 3rd signed photo giveaway winner. I got an address to send it to, but I don't have a name to put on the package. So I got to reach out to you today. And I also want to give a special shout out to Andy's son, Jack. Jack, thank you for being an amazing Mets fan. Let's talk a little bit about spring training notes here. AJ Minter threw his first BP or live BP on Sunday. Got up to 20-25 pitches, threw to Pete Alonso, Starling Marte, Drew Gilbert, and Joey Meneses. The reporting that came out of that live BP session was that he gave up more hard contact that he would like, got less swings and misses, so he didn't necessarily perform the best, but physically he's in a good spot. If you read some of the quotes, it does sound like he might start the year on the IL. He is still pushing to be part of the opening day roster, so he hates to miss time, but this is still a hip surgery he's coming off of. David Peterson is able to give him a lot of pointers because he had the same surgery. And we saw last year, David Peterson made it back in May, really at the end of May. And, he had to build up to a starter's workload, which is a little bit different. But once he got that hip right, it's the best we've seen David Peterson in years. AJ Minter is a guy that still got results, even with a bad hip that he's been dealing with for some time now. So I think there really is a world where he has an unbelievable season, but you don't want to rush him and run into another injury because he's compensating for that hip that he doesn't trust yet, or, end up hurting that hip again, which would be the worst possible thing. So it makes sense to slow play this rehab, give him some extra time. And also, the Mets have a lot of arms that are competing right now for a bullpen spot. So having AJ Minter start the year on the IL is not the worst thing because it allows you to carry maybe a Genesis Cabrera into the season. Genesis Cabrera threw another great inning on Sunday, 1-2-3 inning with 2 strikeouts. That's the second time he's done exactly that. So far in spring, 2 innings, no hits, no walks, no runs, 4 strikeouts. It's a guy that pitched to a mid-3s ERA out of the Blue Jays bullpen last year, and he came on a non-roster invite. So if you want to keep him, you might have to roster him because you never know. Another team might come a-calling with a big league opportunity. So Genesis Cabrera, if you want to roster him and see what he has for the first couple weeks, AJ Minter being on the IL might allow you to do that. Anthony Gassé is another guy that is a left-hand reliever, non-roster invite. Well, maybe you want to roster him. Danny Young is on the 40-man roster without any options. So this could just allow the Mets to get another look at some of these guys, not to mention you might want extra bulk guys in that bullpen to start the year, depending on the state of your rotation. So maybe by having Minter on the IL, you can roster Max Kranick and Tyler McGill along with Jose Butto to give multiple options that can come out of the pen and give you 2 to 3 innings to get you through a start where maybe you only get 4 innings out of your starting pitcher. So I think it makes a lot of sense for both AJ Minter and Daniel Nunez to start the year on the IL, or for Nunez to start the year in AAA and make sure they prove health, because those guys are probably your top 2 set men to Edwin Diaz, but you want them right in September and October. So if you lose some outings in, April for Minter, maybe April and May for Nunez, that's not the worst thing. Talking about some of the guys that we have yet to see pitch, David Peterson, I think he's going to make his debut on Monday, if I'm not mistaken. Kodai Senga should make his spring debut on Tuesday. A lot has been made about the fact that he won't have a full spring outing where you'll see him, pitch multiple innings. It's going to be 1 inning, and then they're going to move him to the backfields to throw some live BP. The reason being they're just trying to protect Kodai Senga, put him in bubble wrap the best they can. Senga wants to get into a game, and that's where a compromise had to be made, because it sounds like the Mets would have preferred to just keep him on the backfields, throwing his live BP in a controlled setting, which you can understand considering the injuries they've already sustained to their starting rotation. But this is a way to compromise, let Senga get some of that adrenaline pumping, but less opportunities for him to, have a pop-up in the infield, and then something bad happens. We'll knock on a lot of wood after what we saw last year with Senga. Paul Blackburn started on Sunday, rough outing. He was facing the Red Sox A team, Jarren Duran, Alex Bregman, Tristan Casas, Masataka Yoshida. Like, they were pretty much rolling with their guys, and he struggled. He got Duran to ground out, but then it was single walk, single, double walk. He got yanked in that first inning after only recording 1 out and giving up 4 runs. But it's spring training, so they put him back out there in the second inning because you can do that. The roster rules or the lineup rules, all that type of stuff, doesn't really matter in spring. So they sent him back out there. He had a 1-2-3 second inning. He did get over 30 pitches. That's the most important thing, is that this guy is angling to be healthy and ready to go come opening day, because the Mets desperately need all their starting pitchers to be stretched out and ready, with Minaya and Montas set to start the year on the IL. How good will Blackburn or even Griffin Canning be? That's definitely to be determined. And that does lead you to, be a little bit curious about the top prospects that can make an impact. And that's where I want to close the show here, because Blade Tidwell was unbelievable on Saturday. This is coming off the heels of Brandon Sproat having a great start on Friday. Tidwell, just like Sproat, was in Syracuse last year. Actually, he was in Syracuse far before Brandon Sproat. He was outstanding in AA, got an early call to triple, really struggled, walked a lot of batters. The strikeouts dropped a little bit. The home run rate skyrocketed. it was a rough time for him, but he had 9 different variations of his pitches. It was just a guy that I think was trying to do too much and didn't really know himself and wasn't on the attack. Now he has spoken about having a clear 5-pitch arsenal, and talk about attack. In his 2 perfect innings, he struck out 5, and he had an immaculate inning. And even further than that, he finished the first inning with a 3-pitch strikeout. So the final 4 batters that he faced, he retired them 1, 2, 3, 4, 12 pitches, 12 strikes, 4 Ks. If you looked at the box score, it would suggest that he had 5 consecutive strikeouts with only 3 pitches in each one. But this is a ballpark for the Rays. And again, this was actually another team that had a lot of regulars out there that he was striking out, big league hitters. But the Rays minor league facility that they're playing these games in, I guess, doesn't have the same pitch tracking capability as you have in Port St. Lucie, where you actually get exit velocity and all this good stuff. You also get clear-cut pitch counts and breakdowns of the at-bats. When you're looking at some of these other spring training facilities, I don't know why they can't update this, but you just don't get enough information. So you don't get clear pitch counts. And for every single at-bat, whatever the outcome of the at-bat is, that's how many pitches going to be shown. If it's a strikeout, 3 pitches. If it's a walk, 4 pitches. If it's a ball put in play, 1 pitch. It's not necessarily accurate, but all the people that were on the scene ended up reporting that he did, in fact, have an immaculate inning and, in fact, struck out the final 4 batters that he faced in the minimum when it comes to pitches. So Tidwell, really exciting prospect. I had him squeezed out of my top 10 that I released over the weekend. It was Nick Morabito and Blade Tidwell as the best player and the best pitcher that just did not make my list. And I could have squeezed him on there for sure. I could have had an Elian Pena, who the Mets just signed, on the outside looking in because we haven't seen him play baseball yet. I could have knocked Drew Gilbert down for Morabito if I really wanted to. I could have put Blade Tidwell above Jonah Tong like I have in the past, or above Noel McLean. Right now, based on where they were at in their respective developments, to me, it seemed like Tong and McLean had taken a step above Tidwell based on what they did this past year, because it was a really rough go for him in Syracuse. But he also got to the highest possible level compared to these guys. Now, you look at Jonah Tong, he's younger. There's other factors that play into why I had Tong above Tidwell. Noel McLean spins the ball at a crazy level. So there's reasons for it. But Blade Tidwell absolutely can re-garner some of that top prospect buzz if he has a great start to the year in Syracuse. And he's 1 call away. So just like Brandon Sproat can impact the Mets rotation this year, there's no reason why Blade Tidwell cannot as well. Dom Hamill's another top pitching prospect that also is considered MLB depth at this stage because he has made plenty of starts in AAA. He also is coming off a brutal season, though. He did have a good outing on Sunday following up Tidwell. He went 2 scoreless as well, did not allow any hits, walked 1, struck out 3. So good last couple days for some of the Mets' top pitching prospects, and we'll continue to monitor the prospects and preview what lies ahead for the 2025 season as spring training continues this week on Locked On Mets. That's going to be all for today's show, but before we close, I want to give a special shout out to Dylan, one of the listeners of our show, who reached out to me to express how much he loves the show, how much him and his buddies enjoy it. They're all diehard Mets fans, and they're also Clinton correctional officers that are on strike right now in New York. So I wanted to give you all a very special shout out. I did a little bit of reading on the situation and found out that they are on strike for unsafe work conditions. And I don't think any of us who don't work in law enforcement can imagine, even, to another degree, to work in a prison and what that must be like, especially if there are, work conditions that have you feeling unsafe. And so I hope that they get what they need to feel comfortable going back to work. I hope that they don't have to be on strike for too long. You all have my respect, and I truly appreciate you tuning into the show when you're on strike and when you're working. Thank you so much for being devoted listeners to the show. I hope you guys get the resolution you're looking for really soon. That's going to be all for today's show. As always, thank you all for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find a link in the episode description to go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listener, your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, Head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel that covers everything in the world of sports. I'm talking about Locked On Sports Today. The local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league by Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.